Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Power of Dairy and Whole Grains, Gearing Up to Celebrate World School Milk Day. So as many of you know, September 29th is World School Milk Day, and we're hoping through this webinar that will provide you with information and resources, help you educate students, and celebrate dairy foods and those foods that go along with dairy and are so important to the school meal program, like whole grains. My name is Leslie Shirey, and I am a registered dietitian with the General Mills Bell Institute of Health and Nutrition, and I will be your moderator and host for the webinar today. Just a few things before I present our speakers, our amazing speakers that we have for today. This webinar is being sponsored by our General Mills Convenience and Food Service team and our Bell Institute of Health and Nutrition, which I am a part of. Our Convenience and Food Service team provides students with nutritious options from brands kids love to help ensure they're well fed and ready to learn. And if you're not familiar with the Bell Institute of Health and Nutrition, we are a team, a dedicated nutrition group at General Mills, and our mission is to be the source of health, nutrition, and wellness expertise. Before we begin today's program, I just want to cover a few housekeeping matters. So as noted from the chat, the webinar is being recorded. The recorded webinar, along with the presentation slides, will be available on our General Mills Convenience and Food Service website. At the end of today's webinar, we will have a Q&A period. You can submit questions at any time during the webinar by using the chat feature located on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. After the webinar concludes, you will receive an email with links to the slides, the webinar recording, and continuing education credit certificates within the week. So with that, I am going to introduce our amazing panel of speakers, and we're so fortunate to be able to have some individuals from the National Dairy Council, Katie from the National Dairy Council, Caroline from the Old Ways Whole Grains Council, and then our very own Chef Monica, who's going to give you some menu inspiration and who many of you may know. And let me just give you a little bit more on each of them. So Katie Baumbach is Vice President of School Nutrition for National Dairy Council. Katie has been with the dairy community since 2016 and is a registered dietitian nutritionist and credentialed school nutrition specialist. She has worked as an expert in child nutrition programs for over a decade, starting with Chartwell's Thompson Hospitality, servicing over 450 Chicago public schools, followed by Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Chicago, coordinating the Child and Adult Care Food Program. Katie manages collaborative efforts with the School Nutrition Association, Action for Healthy Kids, Food Research Action Center, and supports activations with USDA FNS. She also serves as a resource to the dairy community on school feeding programs and school nutrition. Katie has a Bachelor of Applied Health Science from Indiana University and completed her dietetic internship at Loyola University, Chicago. Next up, we have Caroline Suter. She is a program director of the Old Ways Whole Grains Council, one of the programs run by the food and nutrition nonprofit Old Ways based in Boston. She oversees the Whole Grain Stamp program and heads up the Whole Grain Council's educational and promotional activities, including Whole Grains Month, Whole Grain Sampling Day, and a biannual Whole Grains Conference. She is an active member of the International Whole Grain Initiative and chairs the International Working Group on Best Practices for Public-Private Partnerships and Communication. Caroline holds an MS from the Tufts University Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy and a BA from Smith College. And then lastly, we have Chef Monica Coulter. She is a General Mills dedicated K-12 culinary expert, and her role includes everything from identifying products and solutions that are a good fit for school feeding programs to developing recipes for kids' favorite menu items. Chef Monica's background in culinary arts, nutrition, and food science make her uniquely suited to work with K-12 food service. While her career began working with contract food management and fine dining in her native Kentucky, she later attended the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York. While there, she worked in catering and as an associate cookbook editor and also filled in teaching classes in nutrition and sanitation. She also worked in sensory science and as a chef for a flavor company before joining General Mills in 2003. Today, Chef Monica loves combining her passion for healthy foods with figuring ways to support busy operators and staff in their mission to feed children. So for today's webinar, here is the outline of what we are going to cover. I'll go through the objectives of what we hope you take out of this webinar. I'll turn it over to Katie, who's going to talk about the power of dairy for students. Caroline will touch on whole grains and the power of whole grains for students. Then we'll put it together to talk about some menu solutions for dairy foods and whole grains. I'll touch on one easy solution, and then I'll turn it over to Chef Monica, who's going to give you some great ideas on how you can pair dairy foods and whole grains within your own menus. We'll have some time for Q&A, and then we will wrap up at the end. So for the objectives, going back one, what we hope you take out of this webinar is to be able to outline the benefits of dairy foods and whole grains for students and ways the school meal program can help students achieve daily recommendations, illustrate innovative ways schools promote dairy foods and whole grains and encourage students to choose more of these nutrient-rich foods in their meals, summarize the benefits of whole grain-rich cereal and milk and how this combination can help students achieve dairy, whole grain, and nutrient recommendations, and then apply menu solutions and recipes for dairy foods and whole grain. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie, who's going to talk about dairy in the school meal programs and the power of dairy for students. Katie.
Thanks, Leslie. It's an honor to be here today, and I'm excited to share dairy's nutritional benefits and the critical role of school meals in helping students reach their recommended 3 servings of dairy every day. I will also be highlighting different innovative ways that schools can introduce dairy within their menus. But before we get there, let's start with the basics. The most recent Dietary Guidelines for Americans recognizes that dairy foods play an important role in healthy eating patterns, all the way from infancy and throughout adulthood. Dairy is classified as its own food group, in addition to fruits, vegetables, grains, and protein. The daily recommendations for dairy are outlined in the table at the bottom right. You can see for children 2 to 3 years old, they should be consuming 2 cups of dairy every day. For children 4 to 8 years, they should be consuming 2.5 cups. And children 9 and older, which also includes teenagers and adults, should be consuming 3 cups of dairy every day. The dairy group includes fat-free and low-fat milk, cheese, and yogurt, along with the lactose-free versions of milk, cheese, and yogurt, and fortified soy beverages also fit within the dairy category. I do quickly want to touch upon lactose intolerance, which is a type of food sensitivity. People who are lactose intolerant don't have enough lactase or the enzyme that breaks down the natural sugar found in milk. But the good news is most people with lactose intolerance can tolerate varied amounts of lactose. For example, try working small amounts of lactose into meals or choosing foods with minimal amounts or no lactose. For example, lactose-free milk is just real milk, but without the lactose. And also natural cheeses, such as cheddar, Colby, Monterey Jack, mozzarella, and Swiss, also contain minimal amounts of lactose. And lastly, yogurts, live and active cultures help to digest lactose. And Greek and Icelandic yogurts have even less lactose because of the straining process. But regardless, if a child is experiencing symptoms of lactose intolerance, or even a milk allergy for that matter, it is important for them to visit their doctor for additional guidance. So now that we understand the basics of a dairy group, let's look at data around dairy consumption. Unfortunately, as this slide lays out, children and adolescents are not meeting their dairy recommendations. As shown on the graph, the red horizontal lines show the recommended dairy serving consumption by age group, which we reviewed on the previous slide. And the color-coded vertical lines are the consumption by ethnicity. You can see at 2 to 3 years, the aggregate of all children, which is the orange line, meets dairy consumption recommendations, except for non-Hispanic Black children. But something significant happens between ages 3 and 4 that continues throughout childhood and adolescence, where all ethnicities are consuming lower than the recommended amounts of milk and dairy servings, with the largest consumption gap being among non-Hispanic Black children, Asian children, and Mexican Hispanic children, showing that communities of color consume dairy in lower, less adequate amounts. It is important to mention that dairy foods are not the only food groups that are consumed by children and adolescents, but are also falling short on vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. With dairy consumption falling below the recommendations by the age of 4, the milk provided at school is ever more important. A recent study found that 77% of daily milk intake for low-income children comes from school meals. making them a critical pathway to help ensure children consume the important nutrients found in milk products. We know that milk is the #1 food source for 3 out of the 4 nutrients of concern that is outlined within the Dietary Guidelines. Those nutrients being calcium, vitamin D, and potassium. And also, milk contains 13 essential nutrients that help our bodies function properly. The most well-known probably being calcium and vitamin D, which help build and maintain strong bones and teeth. The protein found in milk also helps build and repair muscle tissue. There's also a number of vitamins that help support immune health, such as protein, zinc, selenium, vitamins A and D, which is ever more important given the current environment. Milk also contains a slew of B vitamins, which help your body convert food into fuel, including vitamin B12, riboflavin, pantothenic acid, and niacin. And lastly, a more recently studied nutrient is iodine, which is linked to cognitive function in children. I want to dive a bit deeper into dairy and bone health, as that's an important topic specifically for children. Research clearly indicates that dairy foods are important for building and maintaining healthy bones throughout the lifespan, starting from early childhood to late adulthood. Consuming adequate amounts of dairy foods helps ensure that children and adolescents achieve peak bone mass, which is associated with reduced risk for osteoporosis later in life. And if you're younger, odds are bone diseases like osteoporosis are not yet on your radar. But osteoporosis is a disease that is impacted by what you do when you're young. What you do in the first 30 years of your life sets a stage for your peak bone mass and outlook for adulthood and later in life. Fortunately, we know taking steps early in life can help prevent issues later on. So making sure you, your family, your students get the recommended number of daily dairy servings is part of supporting your bone health. And along with the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, other leading health organizations recommend eating dairy foods to achieve peak bone mass. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that pediatricians encourage increased dairy or dietary intake of calcium and vitamin D containing foods and beverages, such as dairy products. And the National Institutes of Health stress the importance of calcium for bone development and highlight that consuming the recommended 3 servings of dairy foods per day during childhood and adolescence can help meet calcium recommendations. Taking a step back and looking at the whole meal, which includes milk, we know children can come closer to meeting the dietary recommendations by participating in school meals. The handout on the left was developed in partnership with NDC and the School Nutrition Association and lays out the nutritional quality of school meals. And since 2009, the Healthy Eating Index score, or HEI, of school meals has increased significantly, with a 42% increase at breakfast and a 41% increase at lunch. And for those of you who are not familiar with the HEI score, it measures the diet quality used to assess how well a set of foods align with key recommendations of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And it's based on a scale from 0 to 100. So as you can see, school meals are doing very well. Also, a recent JAMA article found that by 2017-18, foods consumed at school improved significantly and provided the best mean diet quality compared to other major U.S. food sources. And this was without population disparities. And the other food sources that they looked at within this study included grocery stores, restaurants, including fast food and quick serve, entertainment facilities, food trucks, etc. This is all excellent and exciting data and research, and a big thank you to all of our school nutrition professionals for helping children come closer to meeting their dietary and dairy recommendations, which helps support their growth and development. Lastly, the next few slides, I want to highlight a few innovative ways to help increase and incorporate dairy throughout your school menu. So let's start with smoothies and parfaits. So smoothies have been increasing in popularity among students and are definitely on trend. According to the School Nutrition Association's 2018 operations report, smoothies are currently being offered in 39% of school districts surveyed, and this is up from 36% in 2016. We have also observed schools reporting an increase in average daily participation after implementation of smoothies, with some schools reporting up to 57% increase in ADP. This slide does link to a few smoothie resources along with a new, recently released 20-page USDA toolkit titled Offering Smoothies as Part of Reimbursable School Meals. It is a very thorough resource and it's very well done, so I suggest you check it out. And similar to smoothies, we've also observed an increase in participation with the implementation of parfaits, with reported ADP increase of up to 32%. This slide includes some parfait recipes that are both sweet, like the lemon chia blueberry parfait, and savory, like the buffalo chicken parfait and fiesta parfait. Both smoothies and parfaits are great ways to incorporate more dairy and also plant-based foods like whole grains, fruits, and vegetables into children's diets. The Dairy Plus plans not only make up flavorful recipes, but they help increase dairy consumption along with vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, which, as mentioned earlier, is underconsumed by this age group. Coffee and hot chocolate programs have also become quite popular. The example in the middle is a social media post in a high school in Florida that implemented a custom coffee kiosk with each coffee containing 2 ounces of coffee, 2 ounces of flavor, and 8 ounces of milk. You can see it's mostly milk with a little bit of coffee. And they experienced a 9% increase in ADP over the previous year after implementation. And this is just one example of a coffee program. And some of the benefits include, one, the milk in the coffee provides nutrients missing in teens' diet, which we mentioned earlier, such as calcium, vitamin D, and potassium. And also, schools can create an on-campus gathering place for students versus off-campus coffee shops. Data does show that 37% of 13 to 18-year-olds drink coffee beverages daily. So why not offer them as a healthy coffee beverage at school? One thing that is important to note is that coffee programs are specific to high schools, as beverages with caffeine are not allowable in elementary and middle schools. The hot chocolate programs are also on the rise as a hot beverage. Schools simply heat up their current chocolate milk and serve it warm. Some schools do purchase chocolate milk in gallons versus a carton for ease of service. And looking at some of the benefits here is hot chocolate milk can be part of a fully reimbursable meal, or it can be sold a la carte. And then offering hot chocolate adds a warm element to school meals. For example, if you're serving a cold breakfast, a hot chocolate milk is always a good option. And then lastly, the chocolate milk delivers the same 13 essential nutrients as white milk, and kids love it. And lastly, I want to touch on milk dispenser. They're another great option that schools are currently exploring. In Oregon, on the right, a school district placed a milk dispenser in their program and found it helped increase student milk consumption while also reducing milk and container waste. Similarly, a district in Virginia on the left saw more students taking and drinking milk and decreased their packaging waste by 91%. Some reported benefits of milk dispensers include students reporting they like the taste better, it's colder, it's fresher. Students enjoy the self-service experience. Some schools have reported space and energy savings. We've seen an increase in milk consumption and a decrease in package waste, and also a cost savings with fewer dumpster pickups. I do want to call out that National Dairy Council is currently piloting milk dispensers across the country to build some case studies and best practices that can be shared more broadly once completed. So be on the lookout for additional details to come there. And that's a wrap up for my portion. If you have any questions, you can submit them via the webinar platform, and we can address them during the Q&A at the end. I'm now going to turn it over to Caroline.
Thanks so much for all that wonderful information, Katie. I'm Caroline Slider. I'm the Program Director of the Old Ways Whole Grains Council, and I'm so honored and excited to be here today to talk about whole grains with all of you. The Old Ways Whole Grains Council is part of a nonprofit nutrition education organization. We help consumers find whole grains and understand their benefits.
We help manufacturers and restaurants create more and better whole grain foods, and we help the media to write accurate and compelling stories about whole grains. As many of you already know, a whole grain contains all three edible parts of the grain kernel, the bran, the germ, and the endosperm, in their original proportions. The bran is where you find much of the fiber, along with B vitamins and essential nutrients. The germ contains the healthy fats and vitamin E, and the endosperm is the starchy center part of the grain. When you refine grains, you're removing one or more parts of the kernel, often the bran and the germ, and taking with it much of the nutritional content as well as the flavor of the grain. Whole grain consumption is linked with a wide range of benefits for children. Studies have shown that it's associated with lower levels of serum insulin, which indicates healthier blood sugar management, less body fat and healthy BMI, lower systolic blood pressure, lower LDL cholesterol, and better reading fluency and comprehension for students. Of course, the benefits of whole grains are lifelong, so getting students hooked on whole grains helps to instill long-term habits for good health. We adults often overestimate how picky children are about their food, and sometimes our own pickiness and assumptions can get in the way of children's opportunities to try new things. Research shows that it takes adults many more exposures to a new food before deciding that they like it than it does for children. On average, preschoolers need 5 to 10 exposures, and school-aged kids need 10 to 15 exposures before accepting a new food. Compare that to over 20 exposures for the average adult. Childhood is actually the best time to teach healthy eating habits and familiarize children with the flavors and textures of whole grains. After all, we know that children who eat whole grains regularly tend to carry these habits into adulthood. The U.S. Dietary Guidelines recommend that children, adolescents, and adults make at least 50% of their grains whole. However, consumption levels fall far below this recommendation. Only about 13.5% of the grains consumed by children are whole grains. And just for reference, adults only make about 16% of their grains whole. It's clear that there is a big opportunity here for us to better support children's whole grain intake. Whole grain rich requirements, first implemented in 2012 to 2013, were meant to do just that, to help close the gap. In order for a food to qualify as whole grain rich, at least 50% of the grain must be whole, and the remaining grain must be enriched. When implemented in 2012, 100% of grain foods that were served in school meals had to be whole grain rich, which meant that at least 50% of the grain served in schools would be whole grain, in line with the Dietary Guidelines recommendations. In 2018, this rule was rolled back so that only 25% of grains had to be whole, but this change was later overturned by the courts. Current guidelines require that all grain foods served in schools must be whole grain rich, so 50% whole grain, but the government is allowing school waivers due to the challenges of COVID. In 2016, researchers found that despite some initial resistance to the new, healthier school meals, 70% of schools agreed that students liked the new lunches. You may have heard the myth that kids are throwing more of their healthy lunches away, but plate waste research tells a different story. On this slide, I have data from 2 different studies, and in each, the authors found that children were actually eating 39% more of their vegetables and 18 to 22% more of their entrees, which of course contain vegetables and often whole grains. The authors of one study remarked, overall, the new requirements have led to improvements in students' diets and have not resulted in increased food waste. The other study found that the revised meal standards and policies appear to have significantly lowered plate waste in school cafeterias. There is new research in the last year showing the impact that the changes in school lunch have made on student health. The changes in meal requirements have raised the diet quality of children across socioeconomic groups. And for children living in poverty, the risk of obesity declined substantially each year after the new meal requirements went into effect. In fact, there was a 47% reduction in obesity prevalence in 2018 from what would have been expected without the legislation. That's truly an astonishing change for the better and a clear reminder of what's at stake for children. It's so important that we advocate for high-quality meals and nutrition for students so that we are giving them the best possible start in life. In addition to improving overall health, the new school meal requirements have been shown to drive whole grain consumption in particular. The percentage of grains consumed as whole grains at school rose from a measly 4% in 1994 to 21.5% in 2014. Children on average now eat more whole grains at school than at home. In 2011 to 2012, just before the new school meal requirements began, 1 in 4 students consumed whole grains at school. In 2013 to 2014, a year after the new requirements had gone into effect, that figure rose to 1/2 of students consuming whole grains at school. Another study shows that students who eat school breakfast every day consume more whole grains, more fiber, more dairy, and more calcium than those who don't eat school breakfast. We've spoken with food service directors all over the country trying to pick up best practices and shine a spotlight on those success stories. At first, when we started those conversations, we would say things like, we know that kids are a little pickier than adults, so if we can figure out how to get kids to enjoy whole grains, that could really help to inform best practices. And right off the bat, we were corrected. I don't think kids are picky, we just make them that way, one food service director told us. This is another quote that I loved from a food service director who spoke at one of our previous conferences. If we don't give kids an opportunity to try new healthy things, they will never try new healthy things. If you don't give them a chance to experience that, then that's a fault on us. It's not a fault on the kids because we never gave them the benefit of the doubt. We never gave them a chance to try something new. We are deciding for them that it's too difficult. We are deciding for them that they won't like it. Give them a chance. You will see the changes in the students. This comes back to the idea of allowing children multiple exposures to new foods so that they have an opportunity to learn to love new foods like whole grains. We know it is easier for younger taste buds to adapt more quickly, and we should be taking full advantage of that so that we are setting children up to form lasting, healthy eating habits. Children's gradual embrace of whole grains is no accident. It is the result of thousands of hardworking people across the country who allow kids the dozens of taste tests needed to feel comfortable with a new food. We know so many educators who are incorporating more food lessons into the classroom or daycare setting and finding that children are extremely receptive. To help cultivate a palate for healthy whole grain foods, a Food Corps member I spoke with conducts taste tests and leads a lesson in every class. Additionally, for every taste test, the kids make posters and do fun activities about the featured food. In general, introducing whole grain versions of kids' favorite foods is an easy place to start. This extends to pizza, pasta, bread, hamburger buns. If you're looking for activities to do with children, we have resources and printable activity pages on our website, wholegrainscouncil.org, that can help get you started. For those of you working with younger children, or those of you who have younger children at home, another fun resource that we released a few years ago is a whole grain song. It's a short, fun little song that was actually created by 2 Grammy Award-winning artists. And free on our website, you can download the MP3 files, sheet music, lyrics, and even accompanying lesson plans that we created. If you go to our website, you will find this under the Resources tab, or you can just search Whole Grain Song on our site. Of course, your best tool for understanding the guidelines for whole grain rich is the USDA's Whole Grain Resource. This document delves into ounce equivalents, non-creditable grains, and all sorts of other whole grain topics that I don't have time to delve into today. If you just Google USDA Whole Grain Resource, this PDF should be the first thing to come up. The Whole Grains Council website is also a great resource. In addition to the handouts and activity pages I already mentioned, we have compiled collections of food service recipes that can be used by schools that are looking for some whole grain inspiration. The recipes are tried and true, kid-approved dishes contributed by school food service providers across the country who have been finding creative ways to expand whole grain offerings available to children. So, sorry, I think I missed a slide that I was expecting to see. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it back over to Leslie.
Thank you, Caroline and Katie. Great information and resources and tips. So we're going to kind of put it together here to talk about some menu solutions for dairy foods and whole grains in school meals. Before I turn it over and we hear from Chef Monica on some great ideas for your menus, I did want to touch on briefly, an easy win and way to get in that dairy as well as the whole grains is through that combination of cereal and milk. So one of the things we do within the Bell Institute of Health and Nutrition is to look at the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey to understand how some of those foods that we're putting into the market contribute to health and nutrition of our consumers and of students across all different age groups. And so this is some data from the most recent NHANES release looking at how cereal can help to promote milk consumption. And so this chart that you're looking at, you can see that in teens who eat cereal, over 70% of their daily milk consumption is from that combination of cereal and milk. When we look at younger age groups from 2 to 12, about 50% of their daily milk intake comes from that combination of cereal and milk. And so you can see how cereal can really help to promote that milk consumption. And at the bottom there, you can see that cereal eaters consume more dairy than non-eaters. So if you look at both the children and the teens, for a cereal eater, they're getting more of those servings of dairy in a day compared to children and teens who are not including cereal within their day. So obviously an easy win to get that dairy in. It's also a great way to get whole grain in, as you can imagine. So cereal is a top source of whole grains for teens, for children. In fact, for children 2 to 12 years, when you look at the total day, it is the #1 source of whole grains within their diet. If you look at the charts below, you can see on the left-hand side, a percent contribution of cereal to whole grain intake for the total day. So looking at teens, that dark blue bar, 58% of their whole grain for the day is coming from cereal. For kids 2 to 12, that's 43% of their whole grain for the day is coming from cereal. On the other chart there on the right-hand side, it's really looking at that percent difference in whole grain intake between a cereal eater and a non-eater. So for example, a teen who eats cereal gets 86% more whole grains within their day compared to a teen who is not including cereal within their diet, so can make a big contribution when it comes to whole grain intake. Although, as maybe Caroline had noted, we all continue to fall short on our whole grain intake as well as that dairy intake. And another thing, tying back, Katie really talking about bone health and the importance of calcium and vitamin D for bone health. Cereal plus milk can improve that calcium and vitamin D intake in kids, and we know they're oftentimes falling short, both kids and teens. So in kids aged 2 to 17, that combination of cereal and milk contributes 27% of daily calcium intake and over 50% of their daily vitamin D intake. So it can be a great way to get in those key nutrients that are so important to bone health. And then we also see that cereal eaters tend to have higher diet quality. So when we look at the diet quality of a cereal eater versus a non-cereal eater, we see that someone who eats cereal gets more fruit intake. We talked about those of the higher whole grain intake, that higher dairy intake, and they also tend to get less sodium, refined grains, and saturated fat, and these all align with the recommendations that we see being put forth within the dietary guidelines. So an easy win through whole grain cereal and milk, and now we're going to hear from Chef Monica on some other amazing ideas of getting dairy foods and whole grains within the school meal program.
Hello, I'm Chef Monica, the General Mills corporate chef dedicated to K-12. I'll be sharing some ideas to help you encourage your students toward consuming and enjoying 3 servings of dairy every day and to boost the amount of whole grains in their diets. These ideas team dairy foods together with whole grains to create appealing recipes and novel menu pairing suggestions. I'm sharing 2 simple speed scratch ideas that only require stirring a few simple ingredients together before baking. These speed scratch recipes are intended to help you reduce waste. Even with the best planning, sometimes you have leftovers. This pudding base works with leftover biscuits or other breads and cooked grains. Traditional puddings are made with sugar, butter, cream, eggs, refined grain products, and maybe a little fruit. They are delicious, but couldn't exactly meet school regulations. I've played around in the kitchen and discovered a way to make delicious grain puddings using a base of low-fat yogurt, unsweetened applesauce, dried fruit, and eggs. The fruit adds all the sweetness. No need to use any additional sugar. These healthier versions provide 1 meat alternate, 1 ounce equivalent grain, half a cup of fruit per serving. Here are the ingredients for 16 portions of biscuit pudding. Use 2 ounce equivalent grain, whole grain rich biscuits. Tear or chop 8 leftover biscuits into 1/2-inch pieces and set aside. Next, mix 64 ounce bag of Vanilla Parfait Pro with 16 ounces of eggs, about 8 fresh ones, 4 cups of unsweetened USDA applesauce, and 2 cups of raisins. I like to add about 2 tablespoons of cinnamon or a spice blend like pumpkin or apple pie. Fold the biscuit pieces into the yogurt spice mixture, then combine and pour into a greased full steam table pan. Bake at about 325 for an hour until the center is set and a silver knife insert into the center comes out clean. For a rice or grain pudding, the base pudding ingredients and method are the exact same, except I replaced the 8 biscuits with 8 cups of cooked grain. Remember, for crediting cooked grains, refer to Group H in Exhibit A. The portion size for 1 ounce equivalent grain of cooked grains is a 1/2 cup, so the 8 cups in this recipe equal 16 servings. I'm sure you've noticed that this is not an ordinary brown rice. My colleagues at InHarvest were kind enough to send me their Sunrise blend, which contains a variety of grains and seeds. This blend contains an ancient wheat grain that can be traced back to Egypt, a red rice, quinoa, buckwheat, and even flaxseed. Preparing a grain pudding with this product provides an educational opportunity on grains, as well as a delightful breakfast or side item. Either of these grain and yogurt puddings can be served warm directly from your serving line. Another option is to pre-portion them, add a fruit garnish, and serve chilled. Overnight oats or an easily assembled speed scratch recipe that require no baking, just chilling. I call this recipe the daily special because you can vary it by changing the fruit. For 16 servings, I combine 16 ounces of uncooked quick oats, 8 cups, 64 ounces of yogurt, 4 cups of juice, and 4 cups of canned, frozen, or fresh fruit. That math makes it pretty easy to see that each serving will provide 1 ounce of whole grain, 1 meat alternate from the 4 ounces of yogurt, and a half a cup of fruit. Once everything is stirred together, refrigerate it overnight so that the oats soften and the flavors blend. For service, portion into cups and service with additional fruit as garnish. Parfaits. Crisp and crunchy, ready-to-eat whole grain-rich cereal combined with creamy yogurt and sweet, colorful fruit create a menu favorite that can be served all across the day. Plus, parfaits work really well with school regulations. With 1 ounce of grain, 4 ounces of yogurt, and a half a cup of USDA commodity fruits, parfaits easily fit into 12 or 14 ounce cups and check the boxes for meal components at every serving occasion. For the grain portion, you can add 1 ounce equivalent grain of granola directly to the parfait or serve it in an insert. One option is to serve just the yogurt and fruit in the cup and offer a variety of bowl-packed cereals so students can select their own and add cereals themselves. Another option is to serve the yogurt and fruit with cereal bar on the side. Parfait components can be served in a range of containers to keep your menu fresh and interesting. Yogurt bowls and banana splits are variations on the parfait theme. Bento boxes or other grab-and-go containers change the look of your offerings and can work for the array of ways and locations you are finding to serve your students. Here are menu pairing suggestions using cups of whole grain-rich cereal. Each of these cups contains 2 ounce equivalent grain serving. Cereal and milk are obvious choices for breakfast, but what about menuing for lunch or supper in some unexpected ways, as do-it-yourself meal kits for students? Maybe the best part of this concept is that while you do the assembly of the individually wrapped items, the students do the final prep work for themselves, and they think of it as having fun. The two ideas are for trail mix and a takeoff on nostalgic ants on a log. The ants on a log your students probably grew up enjoying was celery sticks with peanut butter and raisins. For this version of an ants on a log meal kit, assemble individually wrapped packages of nut or soy butter, raisins, sunflower seeds, and a cup cereal such as Cinnamon Toast Crunch or Blueberry Chex. Complete the meal with celery and carrot sticks, milk, and fresh fruit. Your students can happily dip and enjoy the combination of flavors and textures any way they want. For the trail mix kit, lots of cereal flavors work, but the Blueberry Chex and the Cinnamon Toast Crunch are particularly fun. I've combined Blueberry Chex with dried cranberry sunflower seeds, and I like to add a tablespoon of mini chocolate chips. The chocolate and fruit flavors are so good together. This is what the trail mix looks like when your students have mixed it together. Remind your students to save some of the cereal in the cup to make cereal milk. Pouring milk into a little bit of cereal creates great flavored cereal milk. This is a trendy way to combine whole grains and milk, and a clever way to get students to drink their milk. The fun part about using Blueberry Chex? It turns their milk blue. Thank you for allowing me to share my ideas putting together dairy and whole grains. I hope you've enjoyed my ideas and gained inspiration for your menus.
Great. Thank you, Chef Monica. This is Leslie Shirey, and I will be moderating Q&A. So if you have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat box, and we can address those questions. I did see a couple questions related to getting the slides as well as the recipes and links to some of the USDA tools that were mentioned, and you will receive those. So currently the slides are on our General Mills Convenience and Food Service website, but we also will be sending you a follow-up email which will contain the slides which have links to them to the various resources that were referenced. And you will also be receiving your continuing education credits as well, certificates I should say, as well as the recipes that Chef Monica had highlighted within her video. But if there are other questions that you have for our speakers, Caroline or Katie, or for Chef Monica, please type them into the chat and we can address them. So I see a question, and maybe this is for Katie, about the type and brand of coffee that was used for the iced coffee idea that you mentioned. I don't know if you have any insight into that.
Yeah, Leslie, this is Katie. That specific example that I provided was from Florida, and I'm not aware of the type of coffee brand that they utilized, but it would be any general type of coffee brand. It doesn't need to be specific. I think the important thing with that example is that they used the 8 ounces of milk, so they could include it as part of that reimbursable meal program.
Yep, that makes sense. Any other questions that any of the participants have? Please feel free to type them in. Otherwise, maybe I'll just throw one out to Caroline or even to Chef Monica. Like, are there, I sometimes, hear about the challenges with getting kids to accept and like whole grains, and I know we talked about some great different tools and tips. Are there ways that you've seen schools introducing new whole grains to kids that have been successful? Is there anything that you could touch on there?
I would say giving kids the opportunity to participate in some way, whether it's kind of, perhaps building their own whole grain pasta salad or their own grain-based grain bowl or grain salad. Being able to give them some choice and control often makes them more interested in trying new flavors and experimenting a little bit beyond what they're comfortable with. And I would say that the other key is just to try again and again, because it does take several tastes for most people to accept new foods. And so it's just a matter of creating the familiarity with those flavors.
Great tips. Just looking through the Q&A to see if there's anything else here. I know there was a question about getting the 2-ounce K-12 cereal bowl, and we can follow up individually on that particular question just to get more information from you. And there was a question about the waivers for whole grain rich items. Do we need to fill out a waiver for whole grain rich? Does their menu items need to be 50% whole grain rich or 100%? Caroline, I don't know if you can address anything on what is happening currently from the whole grain rich standards and flexibilities as well.
Yeah, I can say my understanding is that all grain offerings do have to be whole grain rich, which means that they're 50% whole grain and the rest of the grain is enriched. But there are waivers available right now due to COVID. I am not familiar with the process of registering for a waiver, but I'm sure that there's information available on the USDA website.
Great, thank you. And then there was a question about the iced latte. If you add coffee and flavorings, does it meet a milk component in the meal program? Katie, I think you kind of touched on that a little bit, but.
Yeah, and I'll add there that some schools offer the coffee program as part of the a la carte, and it's not included within the reimbursable meal program. The example that I did show in Florida, they do include that as part of their reimbursable meal. And the important factor there is the 8 ounce of milk, and then they do also add to that milk 2 ounces of coffee and then a 2 ounce flavoring to make it that iced coffee.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions, so I'll just give it a minute to see if anyone else wants to type in any other questions. or any of our speakers if there's anything else you wanted to add or talk about that didn't get addressed in the webinar itself. Otherwise, we have one more short video to get you guys excited about celebrating World School Milk Day from Chef Monica. And I did see another question about getting the slides, and yes, you will receive these slides in a follow-up email. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any additional questions, and so we'll thank you to our speakers for the great information, and we're going to have Toby just play one more video. So Toby, I'll turn it to you to play the video.
From boutique dessert shops to large restaurant chains, cereal milk flavored drinks, ice cream, and more are all the rage. This cereal sensation is the kind of fun food experience that your students seek out, and it's one you can bring to your cafeteria. World School Milk Day is September 29th, 2021. Serve milk with 2-ounce equivalent grain cups to create delicious blueberry checks and Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal milk. We have resources you can use to bring a hashtag cereal milk celebration to your school for World School Milk Day. Get everything you need to know, including ready-to-post social media captions and images, in the generalmillscf.com/cereal milk. World School Milk and Cereal Day. What a wonderful way to celebrate milk and whole grains.
Great. Thanks, Monica, for getting us super excited about World School Milk Day. Just as Monica mentioned, we do have a number of resources that are on our General Mills Convenience and Food Service website. And stay tuned that you will receive that email that will have the presentation slides, a link to the webinar recording, your CEU certificates, and then a link to those free Cereal Milk 21 tools to support a World School Milk Day celebration on September 19th. And so I want to thank everyone for participating. And this is just some examples of some of the tools and resources that we have available to you. So we hope you take advantage of some of these fun things like a TikTok dance duet video, Snapchat filter, activities and posters, promotional materials, activity sheets, and much more. So lots of fun stuff out there for you guys to use and leverage within your programs to celebrate. And then I encourage you to stay connected with us. So here on this slide, you'll see the link to our General Mills Convenience and Food Service website, which has a number of different resources beyond what we've shared with you today. Our Bell Institute of Health and Nutrition website, which has a number of other continuing education webinars on there that are recorded and you can get continuing education for, as well as some other resources around nutrition. And then NBC, the National Dairy Council, you can see a link there. We encourage you to connect with them for additional resources, as well as the Whole Grain Council at the end there. So you will receive these slides with all of these links, and you can connect with us on social media as well. So I want to take the time to thank you all for joining our webinar today, and look out for your email with all the information that we provided. And with that, that concludes our webinar for today.